change it as long as the faculty structure is as it is now, and it's very unlikely to change because it corresponds to what is done everywhere else. We had an interdepartmental curriculum, core curriculum, and it depended on people like Van Doren, who were very strong advocates of this, that faculty members who otherwise wouldn't have got into these other things were persuaded to take it on. My literature humanities instructor was Burdett Kinney. He was a professor of French. And this was the first year that literature humanities was offered. So he was studying the whole range of Western texts, really for the first time, in order to teach that course. And it was an education for him. It was an education for everybody who did it, because they had to really stretch out. But that doesn't happen very much anymore. The surviving senior members of the faculty that teach the core courses are people who became converted to this through their own teaching, not through their professional scholarly specialization. And they became members of a core in the spelling of C-O-R-P-S, a core devoted to the core. And they had a great sense of collegiality and sharing, and that doesn't happen. Yeah. So things are, at the moment, going downhill. The only way we can hope to restore something like what it was, earlier, is through the influence of the alumni, who are very dedicated to the core, most of them. They really believe in it. And they express their devotion to it. But they don't have any way of exerting their influence in the curriculum the way they were before, because they were devoted to people like Van Doren and Trilling and so on, and had regular contact with them. It doesn't happen anymore. Yes?
If I may ask you something, would it be okay to ask you something about outside of academia?
Well,
but
you can
simply,
ask whether we can answer.
Oh, I'm sure two of you can answer this, but in a most profound way. But I'd just like to ask you a little bit, since both of you have devoted last 50, 60 years of your lives thinking about Japan, thinking about China, and from the perspective of Americans, I would really like to ask you about the future of Japan, China, and the United States. And not just in the context of academia or literature, but including geopolitics. And you have spent many, many years thinking about the cultures of Japan, China. There are some, well, I have to say, what will the relationship be, let's say, between China and Japan 25, 50 years from now? And what are your thoughts? And Japan is a nation of 128 million people. China is 10 times as big, 1.3 billion people, and getting bigger. Japan will not grow that much more. Japan culturally is a subset of Chinese civilization, I think. I'm Japanese, but I grew up in the United States, and that's what it seems to me. Will Japan ever be part of China 50 years? Is that conceivable? Assuming China keeps on progressing towards democracy.
And is the tsunami some kind of psychic tipping point?
No. Nothing to do with tsunami. But,
I'm throwing that in.
It's a very, very, it may not be your area of your
Well, it's a question that comes out of left field.
And there are some that say, well, Japan will be
integrated. It's not surprising that you would be asking it, because a great many Japanese are concerned about their future now, and asking themselves all kinds of questions about it. I have my own answer to the question, but I think I should let you answer it.
Yeah, I would love to hear your own personal, frank opinions.
I agree with what your premise that it's unlikely that Japan will become greater, bigger. But I think Japan is different. That the Japanese think of themselves as being different, and they are different in many ways from the Chinese. This is not being better or worse, it means different. And even if China becomes very democratic, and even if China becomes bigger in terms of its area, it won't end the Japanese feeling that they are a different people. It won't end their special culture, and so I don't think there'll be an enormous change. The only change I can see is that they'll be more interested in trade with China and in relation with China than they are at present. And it'll be more likely they will study Chinese rather than English. But I don't know if that's only a guess.
Well, I guess the ultimate question is, is there any possibility that China would be able to adapt to democracy the way the Japanese did it? It seems to me the Japanese are much more adaptable than the Chinese as a culture in general.
Well, it's difficult. So the Japanese have kept to their culture in a curious way. In the Meiji period, the end of the 19th century, there were people who suggested that the Japanese abandon the Japanese language and do English instead. And there have been such cosmopolitan, extremely cosmopolitan ideas floating around, but it hasn't really changed the Japanese as far as I understand them. And if one sees the works of art, the craftsmanship of the Japanese is something very special which doesn't exist in China. And I don't think it's going to change people in that sense.
Well, my answer to that is yes, the Japanese did learn some things from the Chinese, and they were good learners. The Chinese tended to be more satisfied with their own culture and not feel as if they had to reach out to surrounding cultures. So they had a tendency to think of themselves as self-sufficient, which the Japanese never thought. From the beginning, the Japanese were learning from continental cultures, including India, Buddhism, and so forth. Korea, even. Korea was a transmission point for the Japanese. So the Japanese were international almost from the beginning. And that consciousness has come only recently to the Chinese in a significant way. Recently, I mean the last 100 or 200 years, right? I don't think the Japanese are ever going to be assimilated or absorbed or taken over by the Chinese. I agree with Donald. They are a distinctive culture, and there are certain values that I think they will continue to hold to, that will distinguish themselves from the Chinese. I think they will want to live with the Chinese and get along with them. But it's a case, in some ways, similar to the problem of Taiwan. Okay? Taiwan shares a great deal with the mainland Chinese, but nevertheless, I think as much as they want to get along with the mainland Chinese, with the People's Republic, I don't think they want to surrender to a China that has not yet become democratic in the same way that Taiwan has become. Now, what are the chances that China will become that? I don't think we can make any really solid predictions. The fact that the Chinese Communist Party has changed its outlook after the Cultural Revolution, definitely to repudiate certain of the principles of Mao. And they liberalized economically. Clearly, that's the case. They liberalized to some extent with respect to the possibility of having a public culture that is influenced